We're definitely excited for your presence. We know that calendars are tight and to-do lists are long, so we definitely intend to make this fully worth everyone's time. My name is Reggie Rucker. I'm the Public Affairs Manager at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. And I'm really just here to set the stage and handle some logistics before we get into the real fun, the real meat of the top conversation. As I'm sure most of you already know, this Thursday, July 15th, most parents will begin receiving the first of their advanced monthly child tax credit payments. These are partial payments amounting to $250 for every child under 6 and $300 for every child ages 6 to 17 every month through December. Now, there's a lot that is new with this policy and just the structure of the policy, and our panel is going to spend a little bit of time on that today. But mostly what they'll be discussing is the impact of these changes and what it tells us about how the tax code can be used to dramatically improve people's lives, and why we don't need to just guess about the impact, because we've seen some similar policies in action. They've proven to open doors of opportunity and transform lives. But before we get into all that, some quick logistics. The webinar is being recorded, so if you RSVP'd, you'll get a link and a follow-up email, and we're also streaming live to Facebook, where the webinar will live on as well. You see our social media channels here, and so definitely be sure to follow us for the latest and greatest on all the tax policy debates. To submit a question, you see the instructions here. Just click on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, type your question into the Q&A box, hit send. We've carved out some time at the end, towards the end of the webinar, so we'll get to some of these questions with our panel towards the end. And just to note, the chat feature is open, but it's not being monitored for Q&A. So if you have a question and you want that addressed by our panel, please submit those through the Q&A function. So with that all out of the way, let me get out of the way and introduce you to the people that you really came to see and hear from. Aidan Davis is a senior policy analyst at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Much of her research focuses on tax credits for lower income families and poverty fighting tools in the tax code. Aidan is one of ITEP's lead researchers on the child tax credit and earned income tax credit at the state and federal levels. Indy Gupta is co-executive director of the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, where he leads work to develop and advance policy recommendations that alleviate poverty and inequality, advance racial and gender equity, and expand economic inclusion for all people in the United States. Natalie Foster is the co-chair and co-founder of the Economic Security Project and the senior fellow at the Aspen Institute Future of Work Initiative. Natalie also serves on the boards of California Budget and Policy Center, the Change.org Global Foundation, and Liberation in a Generation. Dr. Aisha Yandoro is the CEO of Springboard to Opportunities, an organization using a radically resident-driven approach in pursuit of improving quality of life and ending generational poverty for residents of affordable housing. Aisha is an academic, evaluator, philanthropist, and nonprofit executive. And our facilitator for this discussion, Solana Rice, co-founder and co-executive director of Liberation in a Generation, a national movement support organization building the power of people of color to totally transform the economy. Who controls it, how it works, and most importantly, for whom it works. Prior to starting Liberation in a Generation, Solana was director of state and local policy at Prosperity Now. She is a dedicated advocate aiming to shape the most vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable economy this country has yet to see. And as I was doing a little bit of bio digging, I found that she's a WashU grad, and we just crossed each other by like a year. So she got even more impressive all of a sudden. So with that said, I'll get out of the way and pass it over to Solana. It's all yours.
Nice, Reggie. Go Bears. Got to rep that D3 status. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for that wonderful welcome, Reggie. I'm Solana. I'm so glad that y'all can join because this is a momentous occasion. We're seeing something we haven't seen before. This nation really investing in and supporting families with children. And we're hoping that this is a gateway, that this is just the beginning, right? This is not the end. So I am going to invite my colleagues on now. And really, I just want to open it up for conversation. I have the pleasure of knowing these folks pretty well, and so excited to see everyone's faces. So I'm thinking back to March 11th when President Biden officially signed the American Rescue Plan, and it included the child tax credit expansion and these monthly distributions. I want to know what your first reaction was. Did you read it and you were like, or were you like, well, it's about time. I've been working on this stuff forever. What were you thinking? How were you feeling at the moment? I'll start with Indy.
Well, thank you, Solana and Reggie, and for everyone, the other panelists and everyone participating. I honestly did feel almost a sense of relief. I felt like this was going to be transformative, and that people didn't appreciate how transformative it could be. And so I particularly just thought about when people are struggling the most, whether it's been in this pandemic or even before the pandemic, or inevitably going forward, from struggling with job loss, fighting illness, struggling with unmet caregiving needs, or caring for loved ones, that in this country, we're finally, at least for those families with kids, going to give them just some cash to buy them some break, some freedom, some reprieve from the daily stresses of life. And I would just add that the truth is this expansion is both going to dramatically reduce child poverty, and it's going to help a lot of folks in the working and middle class. Beyond that, it's not as though in the US we've seen significant income growth over the last sort of half century or so, really, for anyone but those at the very top. So this is really an exciting moment for the vast majority of families in this country.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what we're having a discussion about today, right? To really appreciate how transformative the moment is. And Aiden, I wonder if I could turn to you to just say, how are you feeling? Yeah, you're in this work all the time, every day.
Yeah, I recall there was a lot to be happy about earlier this year, and the changes to the refundable tax credits more generally, and then the child tax credit in particular, had me feeling pretty giddy. I had spent a lot of time thinking about ITEP's analysis and what those numbers in the spreadsheet meant for people in the real world, and especially folks that are more at the bottom of the income distribution. And we know from our friends at the Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy just how huge a deal this is going to be for reducing child poverty. So I was actually calling and messaging family and friends and completely nerding out about how incredible it is that policy can make this sort of difference.
Yeah, I love that sentiment of like, tell people about it, because I actually think that's part of the success of the policy, right? People need to know about it. So like, yeah, call your people, call your friends. Natalie, what were you thinking in the moment?
I called my people, called my friends. It felt like a huge deal, because it was one thing, like the expansion of the earned income tax credit, the the child tax credit, which we're here to talk about today. There was the parts to the tax code that many folks like on this discussion and probably in this room were participating in, but it was also things like extending 100% paid COBRA, right? For anyone who lost their job, the expansion of unemployment insurance. I think the funeral expenses piece was in the American Rescue Plan. So there were all these pieces that just felt like, oh, right, that's what government could do for me. This is what government could look like when it works. This is what we owe one another when we take care of one another. So I just had those feelings of like, oh yeah, I believe in this project.
Real hope. Dr. Aisha.
Yeah, like so many other folks, I felt so many things. And I think I actually probably did text my friend Natalie when all of this hit, because I think we were all a little overwhelmed. And so I became, felt a lot. I was really excited because I was like, holy crap, here we are. It's basically a guaranteed income for nearly every parent in America that has a kid. And I also was like, let's go about doing the work of undoing generations of harm and really demanding the policies and systems that are inclusive and equitable for all of us. But then after that feeling of hope and optimism, I was like, okay, now we need boots on the ground to make sure that those individuals who actually need this the most know about it and have completed all of the necessary steps so that they can access it, so that this very positive policy that we're all excited about doesn't do harm, so that we don't go about creating larger wealth inequities and larger income gaps because those who need it most aren't positioned to take advantage of it. So I was like, let's get busy. I immediately, after the excitement wore off, I began mobilizing my team and was like, let's go. This is what we need to be doing.
I feel like we already have a takeaway, which is like, tell other people. Now that tell other people. And so, Aiden, I think we want to take a step back. What is the child tax credit? What makes it different in particular? What does this expansion mean for families across the income spectrum? Let's just like set some baseline here.
Sure. So the child tax credit was expanded in 3 meaningful ways under the American Rescue Plan. First, the maximum credit was increased from $2,000 to $3,000, with an additional $600 for each child under the age of 6. And this part of the benefit goes to a pretty broad group of families with incomes up to $150,000 if you're head of household, $112,500 for individual heads of households, and then it phases out. And then second, the eligibility was expanded to include 17-year-olds, and the credit had previously been available to children of this age, but they were removed under the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And then the third and the most important change was that the plan made the credit fully refundable. And what this means is that this is a pretty big deal, and it's the most important piece. It means that families with low incomes can now receive the full credit regardless of their level of earnings and their overall personal income tax liability. So under the old rules, you could actually be considered too poor to receive the full credit, which is completely backwards. So getting rid of that absurdity was really a huge game changer. And as recently as last year, more than 1/3 of children lived in families whose earnings were too low to qualify for the full benefit. So it shows just how important that change really was. And then also for Black and Hispanic children, that number was closer to 1/2. And if Congress doesn't act, then we'll be returning to a world where on January 1st, we'll be back to that same policy. So it's really important to extend this reform. But then in terms of how it helps families across the income spectrum, this policy actually provides benefits to most families with children. It's pretty broad, but it's also strategically targeted to provide the largest benefit to the families toward the lower end of the income scale who have been left behind in so many ways by an economy that doesn't really work for them. And so the bulk of the benefits, nearly 70%, go to families who earn less than roughly $70,000 a year. And also, the expansion benefits families of all races, all ethnicities, but it's particularly important for Black and Brown families who are confronting a long history and an ongoing reality of racism and discrimination that's made it more likely for those families to have low or moderate incomes. And then the other really big piece here is that by paying out the credit, by paying it out every month, rather than forcing families to wait until the spring of the following year, the program can make a bigger difference than ever in helping families meet their needs as they arrive. So, as you all know, bills come due every week and every month, not every year. So getting this money into families' hands in a more timely fashion can really help them stay in their homes, keep food on the table, buy school supplies, just all the different necessities of life. And then I guess the one other piece I wanted to mention is that for the very poorest families, we're talking about a really meaningful amount of money. So families with incomes that are roughly below like $22,000 would see a 35% average boost in their income. And so that's about $4,500 on average for that group, which for some of these families is going to be a life-changing amount of money. It's not going to go unnoticed, and it'll raise their standard of living in a meaningful way. It'll boost their economic security. It'll help them provide a home environment that makes it easier for their kids to thrive and have less uncertainty that comes with kind of the hardship of growing up with financial uncertainty and stress.
Yeah, so really taking away a lot of the previous barriers for folks and just literally expanding it to more people as well. And it sounds like, you know, from our perspective at Liberation and Generation, we're always concerned about Black and Brown communities and families. And so this is really tremendous for them. And I want to ask both you, Aiden, and Indy, does this make the tax code less regressive? How is this, you know, we have seen over and over again how wealth hoarders can use the tax code to continue gathering their wealth and hoarding wealth. Does this make the tax code any better?
I can jump in first. Does that work? So
Yeah.
First, it was a terrific overview, Aiden. The fundamental way to make the tax code more progressive and help families with low and moderate and even middle incomes to some extent is through this tool of refundable tax credits. There's certainly a lot more we can do to tax the enormous wealth at the top as well. But if we want to directly also raise living standards, as Aiden pointed out, refundable tax credits are the way to do it. Aiden and ITEP have documented how state and local taxes are regressive. That means that folks with lower incomes pay heavier state and local taxes as a share of their income than do higher income folks, to the point where the bottom fifth actually pay higher tax rates than the top 1% at the state and local level. So the federal government sort of offsets this regressivity in states. And unfortunately here, as Aiden pointed out, what we were telling folks who had the lowest incomes all this time is that they were too poor to help, that it wasn't, they weren't deserving, it wasn't worth it, that only folks who had higher incomes, and mind you, the child tax credit used to phase in so that it wasn't, there are a lot of people who just couldn't get it, but there are a lot of people who are now going to get a much bigger credit than what they got before, just because we've gotten to the phase in. Then of course we've also increased the maximum credit. So I personally think that it's a very important aspect of this credit that it is pushing back on the regressive state and local tax systems. And just to be clear, that doesn't even factor in the reliance on fines and fees that to some extent many states have shifted toward, that have even led to growing criminalization of the same Black and Brown communities. And I think when people look only at the federal income tax and say, oh, this is a refundable tax credit, these folks don't have income tax liability. There's no one in this country that doesn't have tax liability. It's either a sales tax, it's a property tax, it's a state income tax, there's some way that everyone's paying. I promise you that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'll be the first person to cheer on taxes. But this is just rebalancing to some extent the tax code overall.
Yeah, and thanks for reminding us that like we really have to think about our entire tax liability, right? It's not just like what we owe to the feds, it's like all of the taxes, including the fines and fees that we're paying into our public systems, right? So we have a lot of rebalancing to do, not only at the federal level. Indy, you mentioned that this is not a forever done deal necessarily. What happens next year if this expansion isn't extended or codified into law? What does that mean for families? But also, like, what does that mean for this like transformative moment too? And this is for Aiden or Indy.
Yeah, I think Indy's answer was excellent. I think I love that question because I think there's this pervasive myth in some circles that our tax code is highly progressive and that poor people aren't paying any taxes and that rich are carrying all of the load, right? And it's dead wrong. And sure, we do have some progressive taxes on the books, like Indy mentioned, the income tax, the estate tax. But there's all these regressive levies like the payroll tax, sales tax, and even the property tax in many instances. And when we're looking at the bigger picture, what we often see is that low-income families are being taxed deeper into poverty, and an expanded child tax credit is one way to directly deal with that problem. And it can help offset some of those other taxes that are more regressive and that are falling hardest on low and middle income families. And it really just helps us move a little bit closer to having the kind of tax system that lives up to our most basic sense of fairness, which is that where the tax code is asking more of those families who have the greatest ability to be able to pay. And so, excuse me. And I think it's also important to note that the potential that this has to encourage positive reforms at the state level. So we know that regressive taxation is such a widespread problem at the state and local level. And oftentimes when we see the federal government implement a really good policy idea, and I'd consider a fully refundable child tax credit to be a really good example of this, that can inspire state lawmakers to follow suit and often like take on a similar benefit of their own within their state, and sometimes piggyback directly on federal rules. So I hope if we see a permanent federal reform in this area, and then I hope that states will take a close look at this reform and as well as help get their own tax systems in order and promote economic security within their own borders.
Thanks for that, y'all. And for those just tuning in with us on Facebook or on this platform, we're talking about the child tax credit in practice. We've got Aiden Davis and Indy Duda Gupta just talking about the impact that this child tax credit is going to have on families, on the tax code, and on our economy. We're going to turn a little bit to talking about the impact of this tax credit on families, as we already have some examples, not only from the child tax credit, but like what happens when you give families and provide families cash. Turns out like poverty can be solved with cash. Might be like a newsflash. And so we're going to turn to Natalie and Aisha for some background. Natalie, I'll start with you. The child tax credit is essentially putting cash in the hands of families. Why is it good policy?
Yeah. Why is giving people money good policy? It's interesting. We're in this moment where there's a lot of pilots being run. Aisha will talk about the work she's done that's so revolutionary in Jackson. We helped seed a demonstration several years ago in Stockton, California, giving 125 families $500 a month with no strings attached. At the time, people were like, well, let's wait and see. Guys, there are study after study after study of what it means when people have economic security and cash. And they all point to the same thing, which is people are better off. And so if this were just a war of logic, we would have won long ago. But here's what we know: a couple of things. One is the impact on health and well-being. There were hundreds of studies run in the 70s that looked at labor force participation and marriage rates and a set of things. The new wave of studies happening now in Stockton and Jackson, in St. Paul, Minnesota, in LA, where there's 4 or 5 different demonstrations happening, are looking at well-being, the impacts on health. And we know from Alaska, where there's a 40-year experiment or 40-year sort of natural experiment of annual dividend with no strings attached given to every man, woman, and child in Alaska, that birth rates go up, hospital rates go down, that there are well-being impacts. And we know from Stockton, with the 125 families who received monthly $500 with no strings attached, that stress goes down. There was anecdotal evidence of people, rolling off their anxiety medication for the first time in a very long period of time because they didn't need it anymore. And certainly stress levels went down, happiness went up. So that's, I think, one big piece here. But the second is just the choice people have with increased cash. Sarah Cowan has looked at Alaska, and she's looking at, people had an easier time choosing when to have children. They had them earlier because they knew they could count on cash coming in the door. The choice to take a job that you want, to go to the interview that's a risk, and make that choice to sort of grab a job that is more in line with what you want. That is something we also saw coming out of Stockton, where those who received the cash actually got full-time employment at double the rate than the control group. And it makes sense when you think about the choice that people have with a baseline of economic security coming in the door. And then the last thing, I think, and there are so many benefits, but the last benefit that really stands out to me is time. People talk about the time they were able to take back, not having to work a third gig or a second gig, but instead invest that time in their families. And this is not what shows up on the ledger. We know that people spent the money in the Stockton demonstration on utilities, on bills, paying down bills, on goods and services, groceries. But what doesn't show up on those receipts are the time people had with even just an extra $500 a month. And I think that is really powerful as well.
Clearly, it opens up a lot of possibilities for folks, health-wise, time-wise, obviously wealth-wise. Aisha, I want to hear from you about Magnolia Mothers Trust. One, tell us about it. And then two, is what you're seeing in your experience mirroring what Natalie has just shared?
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you for that. So let me do some level setting. Magnolia Mothers Trust is a guaranteed income project that provides $1,000 for 12 months, no strings attached, to extremely low income Black mothers that live in federally subsidized affordable housing. It is run by a nonprofit called Springboard to Opportunities, which I have the pleasure of leading. And it's based in Jackson, Mississippi, supporting mothers that live in federally subsidized affordable housing here. We started this work in 2018. And when we started this work, we were very intentional about naming the fact that we were going to center the needs of extremely low income Black women into the conversations regarding equity, the conversations around income disparities, and the conversations around wealth. And the reason we were so intentional in that is because when we looked at the disparities, when we looked at the need to have a guaranteed income, which is to provide cash without restrictions, we realized that Black women, Black mothers, poor Black mothers were not included in those conversations. And when we talk about the policies, and specifically the policy right now with the child tax credit, and why we're also excited about it, it's because it's cash without restrictions for parents. And for so many of our parents and so many of our families that are extremely low income in this country and dependent upon our social safety net, the social safety net is not safe, and it is not a net. It is discriminatory. It provides a punitive aspect. There are layers of bureaucracy where you have to prove that you are poor enough to receive the resources that you need to support yourself and your family. systems. And it's quite frankly a system that does harm because you are constantly having to relive the trauma of why you need support. And you are constantly having to go into that narrative that you must be doing something wrong because you can't take care of yourself and your family. So we said, all right, we're going to disrupt all that, y'all. We're just going to give these mamas money and it's going to be great. And at the time, folks did not believe that it would be great. We were the first ones who were centering the work on extremely low income individuals making less than $12,000 annually. And people told us time and time again that our population was too poor to be helped. That was the first thing we heard. And then also people told us that our population should be happy with the subsidies that were already there because the government was working the way the government was supposed to work. We said, all right, whatever. And we did it. And we launched in 2018 with 20 mothers. Folks always say, girl, why you just launch with 20 mothers? Y'all, you try to give people money. You try to raise people to give people money. You try to be a Black woman in Mississippi raising money to give people money. You know, I started with 20 folks. That's neither here nor there. I digress. We started with 20 mothers, and we started with 20 mothers because we needed to get a proof of concept. This was something that had not been done before. And with the population that we were targeting, we needed to make sure that we were doing good without harm. We needed to make sure that individuals would not be pushed off of benefits. And what we learned is very similar to what Natalie talked about with the Stockton results. So what we learned is that regardless of the income, regardless of where individuals are on the income sphere, regardless of demography as it relates to your demographics or your geography, when you give individuals money, when you give families money, without restrictions, they show up and they take care of what they need for themselves and their families. We saw individuals having the ability to pay their bills going from 27% to 83%. We saw individuals not having to opt in to predatory services, which we don't have the conversations enough of in this country about how there are entire industries designed to take advantage of poor people. So individuals for the first time did not have to opt into those services. We saw individuals be able to save money for emergencies, which if we have learned nothing with COVID, that the majority of our country lives a precarious financial situation and not having the financial resources needed to take care of emergencies. We saw individuals being able to pay for food, individuals being able to prioritize health, but the piece that we saw that we had not thought about, which in actuality makes so much sense, we saw individuals be able to show up with joy. We saw individuals for the first time able to talk about how it feels to be able to plan, how they feel like better parents because they can say yes to some of the things that their kids want and not just the things that they need. And what this means when you're talking about having a life of joy and not just focusing on the consumer sovereignty aspect of cash, it's a game changer. And that's a game changer that I think will be the long-term generational impact of this work. That's the piece that I think is the most exciting. 30 years from now or 20 years from now, when it is that baby who was talking about the year that her mom received a guaranteed income and how her mom was so much more at ease and able to show up in her body differently. One of my favorite stories is one of our moms. And so now we've been doing this work 3 years, y'all. We started from the bottom. Now we hear 120 mamas this year. All that guaranteed income, children's savings accounts connected to it, all the beautiful things. But one of our moms from our first year, like 6 months after our first year wrapped, she called us. And our moms, we pride ourselves on being radically resident driven. So our moms have access to myself and the team. And one of our moms was called to check in. And after she called, I was talking to one of my team members and I was like, I just talked to Tacola. And she was like, how was she? I was like, Tacola was happy. And she's like, Tacola was happy. I was like, girl, I know, because that was never an adjective that we would use to describe her, because her effect was an effect of just one where life had been sucked out of her and she just was showing up on this hamster wheel that we have created. And it's a hamster wheel that we have created because we need to feel good about ourselves. And sometimes in feeling good about yourself, you have to make other people feel less than. There's a whole nother talk that we'll talk about next week, y'all. Let me stay on brand. And so it's all of these pieces that we have the data as it talks about the power of cash. We have it not only with the guaranteed income work that we have been seeing, we have it as it relates to the earned income tax credit that we've already had in this country. We actually even have it with TANF, if we would actually go about using TANF in a way that respected individuals rather than just continuing to be a dumpster fire. So we've learned a lot, Solana, and I'll pause and thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. That's, Yes, I'll reiterate and double click on the joy being an aspect that we don't measure enough. And I want us to think about a couple things. We have some questions coming in, but I'm really curious about, from all of your perspectives, what do we need to do to make this child tax credit permanent? I mean, we've heard that like we have to tell people, right, that this is actually a thing, and so that we get good numbers of people drawing down on it. We know that we have to like tell the results that are happening and what we're seeing. It seems like we also have some narrative work to do to talk about, this is not about deservedness. This is like what people need, and everyone needs it. And let's do this, and let's drop the whole, it's gonna make people lazy, or it's gonna drive up our debt. Like, we have to leave that. But are there other things that we need to be doing to make this permanent? I'll just open it up. Anyone can jump in.
Well, I'll add a little bit. Always dangerous to follow my friend Aisha, but I think one of the things that people may not appreciate is that we have lots of evidence of long-term benefits. And in particular, there were some experiments around welfare decades ago, and some more recent ones about a quarter century ago. And what we find is that when there are efforts to promote work, and there are efforts to give more income to folks, and efforts to do both, what we find is that the common thread when children fare better is the income. So let's just say we instead had some policy that had families working more, and their income stayed the same. Say they're in low paid work, they lost benefits, and their income stayed the same. We do not see benefits for kids in those situations. Let's look at the experiments where people actually worked a little less, but their income went up. Maybe they're choosing to spend some time with their kids, which is something that we need to start valuing in this country. Then we saw the kids did better. So it wasn't about the work as far as we could tell. It really was about the income. When you have that little money, the income makes a big difference. So we have evidence that specifically with refundable tax credits, Aisha talked about these, the evidence there. For younger kids, we see that after receipt of refundable tax credits, they tend to do better in school. We see that they're more likely to graduate from high school or get a GED equivalent, that they're likelier to enter college if their families receive larger tax credits. We see that their earnings in adulthood goes up significantly. So one of my biggest frustrations is that some people are going to try to fixate instead on this idea that Natalie and Aisha laid out so well, which is that basically everyone needs and deserves just a foundation to build their lives upon. People are going to fixate on, with that kind of money, some folks aren't going to work. And first of all, I just want to emphasize that the evidence suggests very, very limited such effects. And where we do see such effects, I think we ought to celebrate it, because I think we've bought people some freedom to make the best decisions for their families, as others have already said. There is zero evidence that people are making any poor decisions with the extra money when you're giving money like this. And there's lots of evidence that their kids are better off. And you know what? The kids are going to work more. They're going to earn more. There's going to be higher tax revenue in the future, reduced spending on things that we'd rather not spend on, all other things being equal. But I think people should understand this isn't just an accounting issue where, oh yeah, of course, if you transfer money to a bunch of families with too little, you're going to reduce poverty. We are going about this the right way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And I think just to pull out a couple threads of what you said, Indy, one is that we really need to be working at the narrative level. We need to be telling the stories of the parent who can now afford the football uniform that she couldn't afford before for her kid. And who the kid then was, wasn't able to play the sport he loved and felt the impacts of bullying. But now, as Aisha said, the mom can say yes, the parent can say yes, of the parent who is able to put the first bit of money away for college savings, and how good that feels to do something long-term for your kid, or the parent who's now putting 3 meals on the table a day instead of 2 meals, right? So this is the lowest income earners and middle class families all will feel the benefits of this tax credit. So one is just really working at that narrative level, story after story after story, because we know how powerful one story, whether grounded in truth or not, will mean. And so we have to be able to combat that. And I think there's great work happening to do just that, getting ready to tell, right? These first checks will come out in about 48 hours from now on Thursday, July 15th, and ready to tell the stories of what that will mean for folks. But the other thing we hear a lot is there's real mistrust when you start to talk about this program. We're hearing that a lot in the social listening that we're doing. And I know, Aisha, you've talked about that too. When you first called folks, they said, this can't be true. There have to be strings attached. I don't believe this is true. I will, and then there's the disinformation happening that, you'll have to pay it back down the line, or the government's going to come collecting next year. And I just think it's very important we have the facts out there so that as this program rolls out, it doesn't get mired in the disinformation.
So important to think about. And I wanted to, there's a couple of questions rolling in from the audience. One is about how the child tax credit payments might interact with other public benefits like TANF or disability payments. And I think I'm interested in knowing either from what you've seen in Magnolia's Mother's Trust, or qualitatively, do we have research about like what's happening, what happens in that interaction? Open it up.
Solana, I missed the first part of the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, what's the interaction between the child tax credit and any other public benefits? So
Well, so I think this is a great part for Aiden or Indy, the tax people, to jump in as well. But from what we are understanding, that there's no interaction, that this will not decrease your other benefits, that you don't have to go about reporting this as income, that it won't impact your housing, your rent subsidy, any of those pieces, which is really important. And we have to make sure that individuals understand that. And I think the way that we go about making sure that individuals understand that is where we really need the boots on the ground. We need, this to me is just as important as when it is election season and we are doing all this door-to-door canvassing, making sure that individuals are registered to vote. Individuals who run organizations or have the ability to be in community and have access to community need to be knocking on doors and making sure that individuals understand that the child tax credit expanded is coming, and these are the pieces that they need to know about. And not only making sure that they have the knowledge about it, making sure that they are educated about how to go about assessing it so that they are not scammed or taken advantage of, because we know that their entire systems are already designed. So we don't need individuals to feel that someone is calling them from the government saying, okay, I will register you for your child tax credit. Just give me your social security number and your birth date. So there are those pieces, but there will be no negative interaction with benefits. And so that's a insignificant point that we have to make sure that families understand as well.
If I could just quickly amplify what Aisha said and just say that the fact that this is being delivered as a tax credit helps in this case. It will not be considered as income for federally funded programs. That could obviously be added to laws if this were delivered through some other mean, but we have dealt with this very interaction issue with tax credits, and fortunately right now the federal law does exactly what Aisha said, so no one should hesitate or worry about applying for the credit due to such a fear.
There's another question here that I really want to ask y'all too. It comes from Essie, my friend Essie. Can you speak to about the hiccup of tax credits? Many people don't earn enough to file taxes to begin with. And so how can we support people with low incomes who might want to file but need to pay in order to file, which then eats into their refund? How do we get around that? I mean, this is just the hard part of working through the tax code in this way.
I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in, but it is a problem that we should fix structurally. There's not really a reason why we don't make tax filing more streamlined, especially for the very folks that we're talking about here. There is a free file program for the IRS, even though I think it falls short in many ways. I think these families would be covered. And I'm sure others here have spent a lot of time over the years volunteering for the IRS's VITA program, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. There's also tax counseling for the elderly program, typically for households who make less than 60,000 or so, people with disabilities, folks who have limited English proficiency. These sites are obviously not evenly distributed everywhere, but I'm sure we can make available resources to help people connect with those. And so that's just how I think we have to make do. The IRS has created a non-filer portal. It's not what everyone would like, and it's something that can be improved upon going forward. But it is there. There is a way, and I really hope that we can avoid folks coughing up money to file for this benefit collectively.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there and say it's childtaxcredit.gov. And this was not a fait accompli. And so the question of like, how do we make this permanent? There are the facts, there's the information, there's the logic. And then there is just the advocacy and the politics that has to happen. And it has to involve people on the ground. It has to involve people who are most going to be impacted by this making the case. But just I think that the non-filer portal is a great example. After the American Rescue Plan passed, it wasn't clear that the IRS was planning on doing any of this. And it was great work on behalf of a bunch of groups, which Economic Security Project is proud to be part of, to push them and say it needs to be monthly. The credit has to be monthly. There needs to be a non-filer portal that people who did not file taxes can sign up for the child tax credit. And now the great news is you can sign up for the child tax credit. And if you're owed stimulus payments that you didn't receive because you didn't file taxes, you can also get those. So really, it's what it would look like if we just made services available to people. If we just made taxes automatic, we know exactly how much you make. The government can just send your tax refund. This would be the world I hope that we are ushering in with the passing of the American Rescue Plan this year.
And Natalie, do you want to say anything else about the Economic Security Project's week of action?
Well, we are doing as much as we can to mark the historic first payments that are hitting bank accounts across the country, 40 million parents on July 15th. What's so exciting, unlike stimulus payments, these will hit July 15th, and then they'll hit August 15th, and then they'll hit September 15th, right? They will play out over the course of this year, and American parents will understand what it feels like to be supported by society, to help raise our collective children in this country, and that the support children get should not be commensurate to the income the parent makes. That every kid in America, except for the highest income earners in this country, every other kid in America will get these payments. And so, we're trying to make sure the word gets out, and that there's a real fight to make this permanent, that we'll know in the next few months if we can get it across the finish line.
We talked a little earlier about, this is a little bit of a downer, so I'm just warning you. I know. Especially after Natalie ramped us up. I'm so excited. But we talked about earlier that there's possibility for we don't want this to exacerbate inequities, right? I'm curious about whether or not you can tell us how we avoid these payments going straight to debt collection or straight to fines and fees, that folks are just really going to have to just pay what their debts are. Again, I'm curious on both the experience that you've had, Aisha, but also what others are seeing globally.
So I'll let Aiden go first because I feel like she was about to say something, and then I'll chime in some of the pieces that we know real time.
I was just going to say I'm happy to be on this panel because I'm going to defer that question. That's a tough, like on the ground question. So I would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, so what we are seeing and what we've seen historically with individuals paying off debt is that the ability, so as it relates to your child tax credit, receiving that funding, what we are seeing and what we are hopeful for is that individuals will have the opportunity to make the decisions as it relates to their debts. And what we have seen historically is that paying off those debts has been freeing for the families that we work with, because there's so much debt that prevents you from leveling up. And so, but also with that, this is a chance for policy change and reform, because a lot of the debt that we see individuals having is not debt that they should have. So for the individuals that we work with, it's not consumer debt. Extremely low income individuals don't have credit cards. So we can change that narrative right there. It's middle class individuals and upper middle class individuals that have credit cards, consumer debt. But what we see historically is that individuals have debt as it relates to healthcare, they have debt as it relates to education, and that is education from these for-profit institutions that we have put policies in place that allow them to use their Pell grants. And once you get in trouble with the for-profit universities, you can no longer draw that down. And so you have that debt so you can continue your education. And then we also see these payday lenders. And so what we have seen is that individuals strategically make the decisions about what debt to pay off, but that in paying off that debt, that they are freed to then begin to make other decisions and free to begin to truly live into the spaces that it is that they need. And so I think that to say, how do we go about ensuring that the child tax credits just aren't utilized for paying down debt, I don't feel as if that's our decision to make. I think that the individual should receive the resources and have the freedom to use these resources however they see fit. But I also feel that we should do better and should be better stewards about making sure that we have policies in place that are not designed to systematically take advantage of the most financially vulnerable.
In short, we all have work to do. So the folks that are working on predatory debt, we need to keep working on predatory debt so that we're making headway and getting those barriers out of the way for the families that you're working with. So the answer really is, to your point, all hands on deck. Everybody's got a lane and a role to play in this. I want to close with just two questions for each of you. Does this usher in new policy possibilities? Like if we think about, Medicaid might not have been possible without Social Security years and years in advance, right? Does this open up new policy possibilities? And what is one thing that everyone needs to do when they get off of this webinar? Let's start with Aiden.
Sure. So my answer would be that would be absolutely, and that these enhancements, they are transformative. That's a word that keeps being thrown around, but I think it's really true. I think we need to lock these improvements into place and build on their success with more tax credit reforms, like expanding to non-citizen children and bolstering the tax credits like the EITC for low-income workers without children. I think it really comes down to the fact that our economy is leaving millions of people behind and not affording them nearly the level of earnings that are needed to meet their basic needs. And it's going to really take a concerted policy effort at all levels of government to help us realize more equitable future. So that's the challenge before us right now, is we need to make a fully refundable child tax credit permanent. But then we need to keep up the momentum toward a more just future more generally. And I think the thing to remember is that these are just really immense benefits to families with children. And it's just really pretty incredible that we have the ability to wipe away the most extreme forms of child poverty with a simple policy. I mean, it's a pretty cool thing to kind of wrap your head around. And then I was also just reading somewhere that poverty would be twice as high if not for decades of significant investments through things like Social Security, unemployment insurance, nutrition assistance, and low-income tax credits. So the key is that these programs are proven, they're successful anti-poverty tools. So I think just taking all of these messages, focusing on the narrative, like everyone on this call has said, and just pushing that message out is kind of the next step. And making sure that people on the ground are equipped to have the right conversations about how to move forward.
Thank you, Aiden. What do you think, Indy?
Well, the possibilities are certainly there. That's for us to realize. I mean, where to begin? I'd say there's the fundamental possibility that we can start reaching some of the most marginalized households through the tax code. It's where we deliver a lot of other subsidies for households, and we've been reluctant over the years to reach those who are struggling the most. But if we can figure this out, this will make a difference for future recovery rebates and economic impact payments and more. The possibility Aiden discussed earlier that states and localities will adopt similar policies, the possibility that will align subsidies with costs. Not that this is enough to raise a kid anywhere, but what we didn't say finally is, well, people with lower incomes, they don't deserve as much. The possibility that there are other tax credits that could be advanced this way as well. Folks have very limited reserves, especially Black and Latinx families in this country, typically around a fifth of the cash reserves of white families. So it's quite, while there are certainly benefits to the forced savings and lump sum aspect of tax credits, we're talking about giving people a choice here to also potentially get those benefits throughout the year. And overall, I'm sort of hopeful about some bigger things too. There's something that I refer to as moral hazard fundamentalism. This idea is essentially you have seatbelts and airbags, so people are going to drive recklessly and more people will die. That usually doesn't quite pan out. So here hopefully people will stop worrying about all the imagined terrible things that could happen and appreciate all the known good things that will happen here. They certainly don't hesitate in many cases to shower the wealthy and well-connected with more money. And I hope that we can sort of tie that basic level of cash income to the notion that everyone deserves some basic freedom in this country. And when you help a parent, you're going to help the kid. And when you help the kid, you're going to help the parent. Parents make plenty of sacrifices. Our job is not to force them to make more. Our job is to force them to make fewer, to allow them to make fewer.
Thanks for that, Indy. Natalie?
Yeah, I think we have a moment here where we have 6 months of the child tax credit, really a year of the child tax credit that's passed. But it's just making it permanent is just one of many things that are in the American Families Plan and the American Jobs Plan, right? The two big things that we're considering right now. And it's a reminder, like, this tax credit's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a big shift from 50 years of social policy making. And it is inside incredibly big deals around industrial policy in America and a care infrastructure. Understanding our care infrastructure is what gets us back to work, what builds the scaffolding that allows America to work. So investments in childcare, investments in wages. I think of that as the quilt, and one strand of it is the child tax credit. So I hope that what we prove that it was good policy and good politics in the American Rescue Plan, that will be true for what happens over the course of this year. And if there's one thing that people could do after watching this webinar, you could join us on July 15th. I put it in the chat for a celebration of these child tax credit payments that will start on Thursday, that Vice President Kamala Harris will be joining us for to give a keynote, and a whole bunch of really exciting folks like Reverend Barber, Senator Warren, and I can't even name them all because there's so many, but so many good folks to celebrate what they mean. So you're all welcome. You can RSVP to get a reminder there.
And Dr. Aisha Nayandaro.
Yes, I'm going to end on a positive, so I won't go into whether or not I think we'll do what's right. So I'm gonna lean with Aiden and Indy and Natalie, and I'm gonna end on optimism. Don't let me down, America. I'm gonna end on optimism, but I will say, when we think about what's needed next to get to permanency, definitely going to lean into what Natalie was saying about narrative. One of my good friends, and Price always says that policy changes at the speed of narrative. So we need narrative, but we need multiple narratives. So we just don't need to get into the poverty porn and make it seem as if the child tax credit is something that is just going to impact poor individuals. This is something that is going to impact the majority of parents in this country. So we really do need those diverse stories, and we need individuals not just talking about how they were able to feed their kids, but also how they were able to show up with joy, how they were able to do the extracurricular activities, how they were able to have bandwidth and breathing room. It is the diversity of experiences and stories that are going to change the hearts and minds of policymakers, and recognizing that even though our narratives may be different, that our North Star is the same. And our North Star is making sure that children in this country have what it is that they need to be successful and get to adulthood. So that is what I feel is necessary. And then also, if you had not heard about the child tax credit before, now you know, each one, call one, get your homies to say, hey, have you done your taxes? If not, here's the portal. And when that check hits your account on the 15th, this is why. So, you know, do the outreach so that we can make sure that everyone is taking advantage of this opportunity.
All right, everyone, we are at time, and I hope that our audience is giving a virtual round of applause for all of you fantastic people. If you don't know these fantastic people, you should be following them. That's one. Two, it sounds like we've got to tell people, tell your family, tell your people about the credit that is part of the win, and celebrate. We've got to tell good stories. So tell other people those stories, and let's talk about the possibilities, not only the possibilities for families, but also the possibilities of policies down the road that really, how we say, really advance and work toward economic liberation for all people. All right. Thank y'all. Take good care.